In the heart of Nigeria, nestled between rolling hills and lush forests, there was a village named Umofaya. This village was like many others, with its thatched roof huts, busy markets, and friendly people. However, one thing made Umofaya different from any other place. It was home to a man named Chinedu, a man who always lived naked. Chinedu was a quiet man who kept to himself, never bothering anyone. He was tall and lean, with deep brown skin that glistened under the sun. His eyes held a certain depth, as though they had seen more than most could ever imagine. But despite his calm demeanor, Chinedu was the subject of much gossip and ridicule in the village. People often whispered about him as he walked by, their eyes widening in shock at his lack of clothing. Children would giggle and point, while the older villagers would shake their heads in disapproval. "What a strange man," they would say. "Why does he live like that? Has he no shame?" But Chinedu paid no mind to the gossip. He continued to live his life as he always had, walking through the village with a gentle smile on his face. The other villagers, however, could not let go of their curiosity. They often wondered why Chinedu didn't wear any clothes, and some even began to make up stories to explain his behavior. One popular tale was that Chinedu had lost his mind after a terrible tragedy. Some said that he had once been a wealthy man, but had lost everything in a fire, including his clothes. Others believed that he was under some kind of curse, doomed to walk the earth without clothes for the rest of his life. But there was one person in the village who didn't believe in these stories. Her name was Amara, and she was a young girl with a kind heart and a curious mind. Unlike the other villagers, Amara didn't see Chinedu as strange or foolish. She saw him as a mystery waiting to be solved. Amara was different from the other children in the village. While they spent their days playing games and running around, Amara preferred to spend her time reading and exploring the world around her. She was fascinated by the stories her grandmother would tell her about the olden days, stories of bravery, love, and wisdom. One day, as Amara was walking through the village, she spotted Chinedu sitting under a large baobab tree, staring off into the distance. He looked peaceful, as though he was lost in his own thoughts. Amara's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to approach him. "Good day, Chinedu," Amara said, her voice soft and respectful. Chinedu turned to her, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Good day, little one," he replied. Amara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to ask the question that had been on her mind for so long. Finally, she gathered the courage and spoke up. "Chinedu, why don't you wear clothes like everyone else?" Chinedu chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Ah, that is a question many have asked, but few have taken the time to understand," he said. "You see, Amara, clothes are just a covering, a way to hide who we truly are. But I have nothing to hide. I am who I am, and I am not ashamed of that." Amara was puzzled by his answer. "But don't you get cold? Or embarrassed?" she asked. Chinedu shook his head. "The warmth of the sun and the breeze of the wind are enough to keep me comfortable," he explained. "And as for embarrassment, I have learned that it is a feeling that comes from within. If you are true to yourself, there is no need to be embarrassed." Amara was silent for a moment, taking in Chinedu's words. She had never thought of things that way before. "I never thought of it like that," she said finally. "You're very wise, Chinedu." Chinedu smiled again. "Wisdom comes from experience, little one," he said. "And I have lived long enough to know that the things we often worry about are not as important as we make them out to be." Amara left Chinedu that day with much to think about. She realized that there was more to Chinedu than met the eye, and she was determined to learn more about him. As the days went by, Amara's interactions with Chinedu did not go unnoticed by the villagers. They began to whisper even more, curious as to why the young girl was spending so much time with the man who always lived naked. Why is Amara always talking to that strange man? One woman asked as she gossiped with her neighbors at the market. I don't know, another replied, shaking her head. But it's not proper. She should be spending time with children her own age, not with someone like him. Despite the gossip, Amara continued to visit Chinedu every day. She would sit with him under the baobab tree, listening to his stories and learning from his wisdom. Chinedu, in turn, enjoyed the company of the young girl. She was a bright and inquisitive child, and her presence brought him much joy. One day, as Amara was walking home from her visit with Chinedu, she overheard a group of children laughing and talking about him. They were making fun of him, calling him names, and making jokes about his lack of clothing. Amara felt a pang of anger in her chest. She knew that Chinedu was not the foolish man they made him out to be. He was kind, wise, and full of knowledge that most people in the village didn't take the time to understand. She walked up to the group of children and spoke up. You shouldn't make fun of Chinedu, she said, her voice firm. He's not what you think he is. He's a good man, and he has taught me many things. The children looked at her in surprise. They had never heard anyone speak so positively about Chinedu before. But he's so strange, one of the boys said. Why doesn't he wear clothes like everyone else? Because he doesn't need to, Amara replied. He's comfortable with who he is, and he doesn't let what other people think bother him. That's something we can all learn from. The children were silent for a moment, thinking about what Amara had said. They had never considered that there might be more to Chinedu than they had assumed. Maybe, just maybe, there was something to learn from him after all. Amara's curiosity about Chinedu only grew stronger with each passing day. She found herself constantly thinking about him and the things he had told her. There was something about him that drew her in, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. One afternoon, Amara decided to follow Chinedu as he walked through the village. She kept a safe distance, making sure not to be seen. Chinedu walked slowly, his steps deliberate and measured, as though he was in no hurry to get anywhere. As she followed him, Amara noticed that Chinedu was heading toward the edge of the village, a place where few people ever ventured. It was a quiet, secluded area, surrounded by thick trees and overgrown bushes. Amara's heart began to race as she realized that Chinedu was heading toward a small hidden cave that she had never noticed before. Chinedu entered the cave without hesitation, disappearing into the darkness. Amara stood outside for a moment, unsure of what to do. Her curiosity urged her to follow, but a part of her was afraid of what she might find inside. After a few moments of indecision, Amara took a deep breath and stepped into the cave. The air inside was cool and damp, and the sound of her footsteps echoed off the walls. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw Chinedu sitting in the center of the cave, surrounded by something she never expected to see. All around him were piles of beautiful, colorful clothes, neatly folded and placed on rocks. There were also gold coins, sparkling jewels, and other treasures that glittered in the faint light. Amara gasped in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. Chinedu, she whispered. "What is all this?" Chinedu looked up at her, his expression calm and serene. "This is my family's legacy," he said softly. "These clothes and treasures have been passed down through generations, each piece holding a story, a memory." Amara was speechless. She had never seen anything so beautiful, so precious. "But why do you keep them here, hidden away?" she asked. "Why don't you wear the clothes or use the treasures?" Chinedu sighed, his eyes reflecting the soft light. "Because these things do not define who I am," he replied. "They are just objects, symbols of wealth and status. But I have found that true wealth comes from within, from being at peace with oneself." Amara listened intently, understanding the depth of Chinedu's words. He had chosen a life free from material possessions, a life where he could be his true self, without the burden of societal expectations. It was a choice that few would make, but it was one that Chinedu had embraced wholeheartedly. As she left the cave that day, Amara realized that Chinedu's decision to live without clothes was not a sign of madness or foolishness. It was a symbol of his freedom, a testament to his inner strength and wisdom. As the days passed, Amara found herself thinking more and more about what she had discovered in the cave. She wanted to tell the villagers about the treasures, about Chinedu's legacy, but she knew that they wouldn't understand. They were too caught up in their own judgments, too quick to label Chinedu as strange or foolish. But rumors have a way of spreading, and it wasn't long before the villagers began to whisper about Amara's frequent visits to the cave. They didn't know what she had seen, but their imaginations ran wild, filling in the gaps with stories and assumptions. "I heard that Amara found a secret treasure in the cave," one woman said to her neighbor as they pounded yam in the village square. "A treasure," the neighbor replied, her eyes widening in excitement. "What kind of treasure? Who knows?" the woman said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I bet it's something valuable. Why else would she keep going back there?" The rumors grew more elaborate with each telling. Some said that Chinedu was hiding a fortune, a stash of gold and jewels that he had stolen from a distant kingdom. Others claimed that he was a sorcerer, using dark magic to lure Amara into his lair. Amara tried to ignore the gossip, but it wasn't easy. Everywhere she went, she could feel the villagers' eyes on her, hear their whispers following her like a shadow. She wanted to defend Chinedu, to tell everyone the truth about him, but she knew that they wouldn't believe her. They were too set in their ways, too afraid of what they didn't understand. Despite the rumors, Amara continued to visit Chinedu in the cave. She knew that he was a good man, wise and kind, and she valued his friendship too much to let the villagers' ignorance drive a wedge between them. As the weeks turned into months, Amara and Chinedu's friendship grew stronger. They spent hours together in the cave, talking about everything from the stars in the sky to the meaning of life. Chinedu shared stories of his ancestors, tales of bravery and sacrifice that had been passed down through generations. Amara, in turn, told him about her dreams and aspirations, about her desire to explore the world and learn all that she could. Chinedu was impressed by Amara's curiosity and thirst for knowledge. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who was not content to live a life defined by the narrow expectations of others. He encouraged her to follow her dreams, to seek out the truth and never be afraid to question the world around her. One day, as they sat together in the cave, Chinedu turned to Amara with a serious expression. "Amara," he said, "there is something I want to share with you. something that I have never told anyone before. Amara's heart skipped a beat. She could tell from his tone that this was something important, something deeply personal. "What is it, Chinedu?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Chinedu took a deep breath before speaking. "The reason I live the way I do, without clothes, is not just because I want to be free from material possessions. There is more to it than that." Amara listened intently. Her eyes locked on Chinedu's face as he continued. "You see, when I was a young man, I was very different from the person you see now. I was obsessed with wealth and status, always striving to be better than everyone else. I wore the finest clothes, owned the most valuable treasures, and spent my days accumulating more and more. But despite all my wealth, I was never truly happy. I was always chasing after something, always feeling like I wasn't good enough. I became arrogant and prideful, looking down on those who had less than me." Chinedu paused, his voice tinged with regret. "It wasn't until I lost everything in a fire that I realized how empty my life had been. All my possessions, all the things I'd worked so hard to obtain, were gone in an instant. I was left with nothing, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. That was when I made the decision to live without clothes, without the trappings of wealth and status. I wanted to strip away everything that had held me back, everything that had kept me from being my true self." Amara was silent for a moment, taking in Chinedu's words. She could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of the choices he had made. But she also saw the strength and wisdom that had come from those choices. "Chinedu," she said softly, "I understand why you made that decision, and I think it's incredibly brave of you to live the way you do." Chinedu smiled, a look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Amara. It means a lot to hear you say that." From that day on, Amara felt an even deeper connection to Chinedu. She admired his strength, his courage, and his commitment to living a life true to himself. And in turn, Chinedu found in Amara a loyal friend, someone who accepted him for who he was, without judgment or prejudice. As Amara and Chinedu's friendship deepened, the villagers grew increasingly concerned. They didn't understand why Amara, a bright and promising young girl, was spending so much time with someone they considered strange and out of place. Some even began to worry that Chinedu was having a bad influence on her. One day, Amara's parents called her aside for a serious talk. They were kind and loving people, but they were also deeply concerned about their daughter's well-being. "Amara," her mother began, her voice gentle but firm, "we need to talk to you about Chinedu." Amara looked up at her parents, her heart sinking. She knew what they were going to say, and she dreaded the conversation that was about to unfold. "Your mother and I are worried about you," her father added. "We've heard the rumors, and we don't like what people are saying. We don't understand why you're spending so much time with Chinedu." Amara took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain. "Mama, Papa," she began. "Chinedu is not what people think he is. He's kind and wise, and he's taught me so much. I know he seems different, but he's not a bad person." Her parents exchanged worried glances. "Amara, we know you have a good heart," her mother said gently. "But sometimes, people who are different can lead us down the wrong path. We just want what's best for you." "I understand that, Mama," Amara replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But I promise you, Chinedu is not leading me astray. He's helping me see the world in a new way, to understand things that I never would have thought of before." Her father sighed, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We trust you, Amara. But please, be careful. The world can be a harsh place, and not everyone will understand your choices." Amara nodded, grateful for her parents' concern, but determined to stand by her friend. She knew that Chinedu was misunderstood, but she also knew that his wisdom and kindness were things that the village desperately needed to understand. As the village of Umofia prepared for the annual festival of masks, there was an air of excitement and anticipation. The festival was one of the most important events of the year, a time when the villagers would come together to celebrate their ancestors, tell stories, and perform traditional dances. Everyone in the village was busy with preparations. Women sewed colorful garments, men carved intricate masks out of wood, and children practiced their dance routines. The streets were filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and the clattering of tools. Amara, too, was caught up in the excitement. She had always loved the Festival of Masks, and this year she was especially excited because she had convinced Chinedu to join the celebrations. At first, Chinedu had been hesitant. He had always kept to himself, preferring the solitude of his cave to the bustling life of the village. But Amara had insisted, telling him that the festival was a time for everyone to come together, regardless of who they were. "Chinedu," Amara had said, her eyes shining with excitement. "The festival is about celebrating who we are, our history, our culture. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Chinedu had smiled at her enthusiasm. "Very well, Amara," he had replied. "I will join you at the festival." The day of the festival arrived, and the village was alive with color and energy. People wore elaborate costumes and masks, transforming themselves into spirits and ancestors. The air was filled with the scent of roasted meat, spices, and freshly baked bread. Amara was dressed in a beautiful outfit her mother had made for her, a flowing gown of bright blue fabric adorned with intricate beadwork. She wore a mask that covered her face, leaving only her eyes visible. As she walked through the village, she spotted Chinedu standing by himself at the edge of the square. He was dressed in his usual manner, but he had donned a simple mask that Amara had made for him, a gesture that filled her with pride. Amara made her way to him, her heart pounding with excitement. "Chinedu, you look wonderful," she exclaimed, her voice muffled by her mask. Chinedu chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Thank you, Amara," he replied. "This is quite the event. I'm glad you convinced me to come." As they stood together, watching the festivities, Amara felt a deep sense of contentment. For the first time, she felt that Chinedu was truly a part of the village, that he belonged there just as much as anyone else. As the night wore on and the festival reached its peak, a group of young men emboldened by drink began to notice Chinedu standing with Amara. They had always been wary of him, uncomfortable with his unconventional lifestyle. Now, fueled by the excitement of the festival and the anonymity provided by their masks, they decided to confront him. "Hey, Chinedu!" one of the men called out, his voice slurred with alcohol. "What are you doing here? This festival is for real villagers, not for someone like you." Amara's heart sank as she heard the words. She had hoped that the festival would be a time for unity, not division. She stepped forward, ready to defend her friend, but Chinedu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "It's all right, Amara," Chinedu said calmly. "They are just speaking out of fear and misunderstanding." But the young men weren't satisfied with Chinedu's calm demeanor. They moved closer, their voices growing louder and more aggressive. "Why don't you wear clothes like everyone else?" another man shouted. "What's wrong with you?" Amara could feel the tension in the air, the way the other villagers were starting to take notice of the confrontation. She could see the looks of disapproval on their faces, the way they seemed to be siding with the young men. But before she could say anything, Chinedu spoke up, his voice firm but gentle. "I live as I do because it is who I am," he said. "I do not seek to harm anyone, nor do I judge others for their choices. I only ask that you show me the same respect." The young men were taken aback by Chinedu's words. They had expected him to be defensive, to argue or try to justify himself, but instead he had responded with calmness and dignity, refusing to be drawn into their hostility. For a moment, there was silence. The young men looked at each other, unsure of how to react. Finally, one of them muttered something under his breath and turned away, followed by the others. Amara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She turned to Chinedu, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You handled that so well." Chinedu smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Amara, sometimes it's not enough to be calm and patient," he said. "But I have learned that responding to anger with more anger only leads to more pain. It is better to show kindness even in the face of hostility." Amara nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. But she also knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The villagers' attitudes toward Chinedu would not change overnight, and there would be more challenges to come. As the festival of masks drew to a close, the village returned to its normal routine. But something had changed. Chinedu's presence at the festival had sparked a new wave of gossip and speculation, and the villagers seemed more divided than ever in their opinions of him. Some people began to see Chinedu in a new light, recognizing the wisdom and kindness that Amara had always seen in him. They started to question their own prejudices and assumptions, wondering if perhaps they had been too quick to judge. Others, however, remained suspicious and wary, convinced that Chinedu was up to no good. They whispered about him behind his back, spreading rumors and half-truths that only served to fuel the fire of mistrust. Amara found herself caught in the middle of this growing divide. She wanted to protect her friend, to defend him against the unjust accusations, but she also knew that she couldn't force people to change their minds. The best she could do was continue to stand by Chinedu and show the village that he was not the person they thought he was. One day, as Amara was walking through the village, she overheard a group of girls talking about Chinedu. They were older than her, teenagers on the cusp of adulthood, and their words were filled with disdain and mockery. "Did you see Chinedu at the festival?" one of the girls sneered. "He looks so out of place. I don't know why Amara keeps hanging around with him." "Yeah," another girl added. "It's like she's under some kind of spell. Maybe he's using magic to control her." Amara's blood boiled at their words. She couldn't stand to hear them speak about Chinedu that way, especially when they knew nothing about him. She marched over to the group, her eyes blazing with anger. "You don't know anything about Chinedu," she snapped, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's not what you think he is. He's kind, wise, and he's taught me so much. You have no right to judge him." The girls stared at her in shock, their expressions a mix of surprise and embarrassment. They had never seen Amara so angry, and they didn't know how to respond. After a moment, one of the girls, a tall girl with long braids, stepped forward. "Amara, we didn't mean to upset you," she said, her tone more apologetic. "We were just talking, that's all." "But your words have consequences," Amara replied, her voice softening slightly. "Chinedu is a good person, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like this. Please try to understand that." The girls exchanged uneasy glances before nodding reluctantly. They didn't say anything more as Amara walked away, but she could tell that her words had made an impact. As she continued on her way, Amara felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew that she couldn't change everyone's minds, but she hoped that, little by little, the village would begin to see Chinedu for who he really was. Amara's defense of Chinedu did not go unnoticed. Word quickly spread throughout the village, and soon everyone was talking about the young girl who had stood up for the naked man. Some people admired her courage, while others were more skeptical, wondering if she had been bewitched by Chinedu's strange ways. But Amara didn't let the gossip bother her. She continued to spend time with Chinedu, learning from him and growing closer to him with each passing day. The more she got to know him, the more she realized how much they had in common. They both valued wisdom and knowledge. Both questioned the world around them, and both refused to be defined by the narrow expectations of society. One afternoon, as they sat together in the cave, Amara asked Chinedu a question that had been on her mind for a while. "Chinedu, do you ever regret the choices you've made? Do you ever wish that you had lived your life differently?" Chinedu was silent for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "There have been times when I've wondered what my life would have been like if I had made different choices," he admitted. "But I have never regretted the path I've chosen. It has led me to a place of peace, a place where I can be true to myself without the burden of material possessions or societal expectations." Amara nodded, understanding his perspective. "I think I understand now why you live the way you do," she said softly. "It's not about rejecting the world, but about finding your own way to be in it." Chinedu smiled, pleased by her insight. "Yes, Amara, that is exactly it," he replied. "We each have our own path to walk, our own journey to take. The important thing is to stay true to ourselves, no matter what others may think or say." Amara felt a deep sense of connection with Chinedu in that moment, a bond that went beyond friendship. She realized that he had become a mentor to her, someone who had guided her to a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. And in turn, Chinedu found in Amara a kindred spirit, someone who shared his values and understood his choices. He admired her courage, her curiosity, and her willingness to see beyond the surface, to look deeper into the heart of things. And so the story of Amara and Chinedu continues. What challenges and adventures await them next? Stay tuned and subscribe to follow their journey.